We're moving on to this week to start talking about pressure and wind. Pressure is directly related to wind. So, what is pressure? Well, the air has weight, we all have learned through the years. And when you're flying, the higher up in the atmosphere, the less the pressure is. So, let's take a look at a little bit of a surface map here right now. There's high pressure sitting over New England. And then up here, pretty strong low pressure over central Canada right now. And weak low pressure along, and here's a little bit of a ripple of the low pressure over Florida right now. These lows along this front, and this is a separation between some very, very cold air to the north and some much warmer air to the south, are causing lots of clouds just north of this area. So if you were flying into the eastern part of the United States right now, you'd be going into lower clouds and possibly some significant icing conditions. So it's interesting sometimes just to watch how the surface map changes. 24 hours ago, that cold front was just coming through southeastern Virginia. There was a weak low along it, and the high pressure was a 1044 high centered over the central United States. 24 hours later, that same high, a little bit left out here, but the biggest of it is centered over New England now. The cold front, where it was passing through, has made it down to central Florida, hasn't made it all the way into South Florida yet. So quite a change in the way the pressure field developed. One of the interesting things is the pressure gradient, or the change in pressure, is a way of looking at wind speeds. So here we have some pretty tight pressure gradient. Pressure is dropping very quickly in this area, and we have pretty strong east, south, southerly winds here blowing up and across here, and southwesterly winds. Along the eastern United States, right here, there's also a relatively tight pressure gradient, and right along the immediate coast, it's coming out. You'll notice it comes out of a high towards low at the surface. And that's due to the friction of the air with the surface. It actually is what causes that. Further aloft, you'll see them tend to go parallel to the contours you're looking at. But here we have north winds, 20 knots up here across the water. If you were in a boat today, there's lots of wind. There's 25 to 30 knot gusts across my area here in southeastern Virginia right now, coming out of the north, pushing down and pushing this front southward. So with this, if there is another weak low that's developing here, that'll keep the pressure gradient strong, and it'll keep pushing winds out of the north. So just looking at this surface map, we can go in and look a little bit more detail with it. And here you can actually see some of the values on station plots. And notice 25 knots of north wind here. Pressure is 1022, 23.9 here. Pressure 1025.5 here. Fairly high pressure, actually. And if you move the map up and look down here over Florida, you can actually see there might be a little bit of trying to do a circulation there, but it's not very much yet. But looking at the temperatures that go along with this, are quite cold. The temperatures still in the teens in Pennsylvania, for example, in West Virginia, and in the 20s, or right around freezing in much of the eastern part of the United States here. So if you have cold air is much more dense. So what it does is causes the pressure to drop faster in the vertical. So if that's the case, then you would think you would have, with this extremely cold air out here, you would have some kind of low pressure in the vertical where pressure has dropped. So if you looked at 500 millibars, yeah, there is actually a trough of low pressure back where the air is the coldest. And there's more back in here coming down. These are all contours. You'll notice too with the wind here, they blow parallel because friction isn't much of a factor at this level. And this is at halfway up through the atmosphere at 500 millibars. And this is a contour map. Contours on 500 millibar mean that the 500 millibars is either higher at this level or lower at this level. It's just a map of the height of 500 millibar. So where 500 millibars is closer to the ground, and you may actually have colder air and more temperature contrast in the vertical in that area. And you can also see where the lines are close together. The winds are coming out of the southwest here, parallel to this. And as close as they are, look at it, it's 35 knots, 60 knots, 80, 90 knots up in here. So they're very tight gradient, very strong winds. And where this low pressure is at 500 millibar here, that is what actually is going to eventually be impacting our surface front and causing it maybe to have a low pressure along it, which might bring some icing and snow to the eastern part of the United States. Another fact of this is you can look at the upper air sounding with this. And this is Morehead City this morning. I chose it because Morehead City, if you were flying in there, you would notice that most of your flight, if you were around 850 or about 3,000, 4,000 feet up, is above freezing. Temperatures here are about 35 degrees. However, as you went down and dropped down towards the surface, temperatures drop off to around 28, 29 degrees here, and they actually are about 31 degrees here at the surface right now. So if precipitation is falling, it starts out as snow up here, probably melts in this area, and then comes back into here where icing is forming. So if, as you were flying in, if you stayed at a very low altitude, you're not going to do, but you would find that this is where the front is. You're passing right through a cold front right here at this level. And you can see the wind shift right here too. They're out of the west. And where the cold front went through, you have north-northeast winds at 20-some knots. At the surface, you have north winds. So again, if you're flying into here, winds are changing, temperatures are changing, and you could have some icing in this area. And that is one of the things they're actually talking about down here, is there may be an ice storm with this low coming up. So with this low coming up, one of the things you can actually look at with satellite, kind of neat, is you can see if the clouds, we know there's low pressure at the upper levels out here. Well, I want to see these clouds start coming back to the north to see if they're going to be developing into bringing moisture northward with it. I happen to be over here, and I'm getting a forecast at my house right now of 2 to 4 inches of snow. Well, if that's going to happen, then some of this moisture that's down here in Florida and off the East Coast has got to be pulled back to the north. And there's just not a lot of that going on yet. We'll have to wait and see on that part. You can also see all the snow on the ground up over New England here. Oh yeah, the sunset already starting to show up on the map up here. We talked about the angles of the sun past week. And finally, just moving on to the next one. This is a moisture. And sometimes you can really pick out upper level circulations and mid levels. And here is one right here across Iowa and all. Kind of corresponds to what we were looking at the 500 millibar if you go back. Right in here. So there's actually a circulation, a low pressure system aloft in that area. That's what's going to help to develop this low pressure area here as it's moving along. So we will see. I think that's about all I have. We'll talk to you more later. If you have any questions about this, let me know.